So welcome those who are joining us. Today we're going to talk about how to ace your aesthetic. And so a little different talk about preparing for the job search, but I hope we can have an engaging conversation. And really, again, wanting to make this a conversation for those that are here, really wanting to see what your interest or I guess thoughts were in coming to join this conversation today. But really, in thinking about having this conversation, my goals were really trying to think about this idea of professionalism and what are the expectations that we have in the workplace versus the interview setting. Also talking about kind of thinking about your own aesthetic, how that can be incorporated in your professional style and a presence in an interview setting, and then strategies on how to set up and manage a virtual interview space. And so thinking about this conversation, so a little bit about me. My name is Caress Gillespie. I serve as the Candidate Connections Chair for the Placement Exchange Committee. And part of my kind of goal on the committee is thinking about conversations and things that will help candidates really prepare for this search. And so when I was thinking about that, I was really thinking about this virtual interview setting and all of the different expectations around what it has to be and what you have to look like and how you show up in these spaces, and wanting to make sure that we were able to kind of really help redefine that for candidates and give a space to talk about that. Because I think we've been able to talk about all the changes that COVID has made to our profession, to the job search, and different aspects of our work, but not really of talking about down to the nitty gritty of kind of how we show up physically. And then also kind of unpack some of those maybe archaic notions of what we think about when we think about professionalism. So really, I'm going to unpack and talk about what is professionalism. And when we think about this idea of professionalism, I want to try to move us towards this idea of like thinking about your aesthetic, and not aesthetic in the terms of our TikTok generation, but aesthetic in the terms of trying to define how you show up in your style in all aspects from your own vantage point and not necessarily from the vantage point of others. And so we're going to talk about your style, your presence in an interview space, and then also tips in that interview environment. And so really this conversation is trying to dismantle some of those isms or some of the outdated practices I think we've all been told or had given at some point in our life as we thought about what it means to show up at work and what does it look like when you are working or even showing up in an interview setting. So when I thought about this idea of professionalism, right, I went straight to Google and Google, what is a professionalism? And here's some definitions. So relating or belonging to profession or a profession, anyone who earns their living from performing an activity that requires a certain level of education or skill or training. And I don't know about you, but when I was learning, I was told if the definition has the word in it, it may not be the best type of definition. And so when I went through and further looked at some ideas of this, like, what does it mean to be professional, professionalism, professional in the workplace? So Googling all kinds of things, I found these various lists of what does it mean to be professional or professional characteristics in the workplace. And what I got was very, again, more vague and nebulous characteristics. So a neat appearance, proper demeanor in person and online, reliable, competent communicator, good phone etiquette, poised and ethical. And so again, as we start to really look at this idea of what professional is, and then professionalism, and then apply it to the workplace, it is very much this idea of, jumping ahead, very much a subjective, very much something that can morph based on the profession, based on the environment. And it's really hard to determine from an individual standpoint, kind of a neat appearance, reliable. I think all of these different characteristics are things that are kind of learned or developed in collaboration with your values or even how you're raised. And so when we apply these to a workplace, or we apply these and try to universally say this is what we mean, it gets a little hard or it gets a little challenging to fit one mold. And so I want to break up this idea of professionalism and have us start to name the fact that it's a bunch of BS. And so this next slide. So also when we look at professionalism, these are some charts that are from, one of them are from an institution. So if you work in the career services field or have accessed career services units, we all try, and even I work in student living, and we always try to think about how do we prepare our students to think about the work world and getting ready. So infographics are helpful, or lots of pictures. I think I know when I was looking for my first job, when I went to the career center, they gave me a graphic of like, these are the things you need to wear, and this is how you need to look. And so if you look at these images, a lot of the images that show up, I was really shocked and really glad to see that some of the images that showed up included women. They included people of different perceived races and ethnicities. A lot of them still had a lot of men. A lot of them, all of them showed people who looked physically able. So no people with physical disabilities. But again, the majority of them were white, the majority of them were men, and then the majority of them presented the same information in regards to this idea of a suit that was well fitted, neutral colors. And so neutral colors were defined as dark or solid. Also, light colors should be worn underneath, no stripes or bright colors. The shoes were always either comfortable, or if it was a woman presented, heels or dress shoes were fine. And then there were all different levels of business, professional. So we have this idea, and I think professionalism has always been categorized with the idea of business, so the business sector. But I think, again, multiple different sectors have adapted it, but I think we rely on this idea of business in our definitions of professionalism. But there was business professional, business casual, smart casual. I also saw snappy casual. And so all these adaptations of a lot of similar characteristics in regards to very much neutral colors, a lot of the things as it related to descriptions of folks that presented as women were kind of thinking about not showing too much skin or not being too short. And the well-fittedness of kind of making sure to cover and be mindful of length as it related to any skirts or dresses. And then as it related to tops, nothing too low cut or showing of the chest. And so again, as we really unpack all of these things as it relates to the messages of dress and the expectations of dress, a lot of them can be associated with a lot of our own biases, a lot of biases as it relates to how bodies are supposed to look or how bodies are expected to look as it relates to norms, or norms as we think about able bodies, norms as we think about specific body types, or it starts to feed into this narrative of what does a body, a professional body, a body that works, that is eligible to work, or that should be working should look like. And so again, when we think about this idea of professionalism, we're repeating this narrative of this idea of a body, of this idea of how this body should dress that is very rigid, archaic, and that is steeped in a lot of bias that I think a lot of our students don't necessarily align with. I know personally, for myself, and looking at a lot of these definitions and looking at a lot of these messages, it was challenging for me to feel like I was represented or being spoken to. I think particularly, I can share kind of one personal story. I think when I think about professionalism as it relates to hairstyle, this image that I'm showing really struck me because it talked about make sure your hair is well kept in a neat professional style. And when I went to go Google professional styles for Black women, it was all hair that was straight. It was all hair that was pulled back. And so again, thinking about my hair and its natural texture, thinking about there's laws that particularly are named and that are particularly being passed in this this year and in the last few years around not discriminating against Black women's natural hair state. I think in women, particularly Black women or other women of different ethnicities that have different textured hair that serve in the military are forced to align or kind of create their hair in a texture that is not how it's grown naturally. And so when I think about these messages and trying to prepare for an interview scenario, one of the challenges I had when I was first interviewing was, do I straighten my hair? Am I able to wear braids? Or like, how does this get negotiated? And when I'm thinking about a job that is for my livelihood, the last thing that I think should be on my mind is how I'm wearing my hair, right? Do I wear it how it's growing out my head? Or do I wear it as in this way that is well kept or in a neat professional style that Google tells me it is? And so again, thinking about all of these standards aren't necessarily messaged towards the true workforce or towards everyone that might be able to, or that everyone that is consuming these messages. And so for me, I really had to challenge or think within myself, hey, this is the hair and how I want to wear my style, and this is how I'm going to show up. And if an institution criticizes that or does not, or comes with bias against how I wear my hairstyle, that's not an institution or a place for me to work. And again, that was a personal choice that I made, but I understand the real repercussions of that for other women, and particularly women that have different textured hair. And so again, that's just one example of how some of these definitions don't fit or don't align with the true workforce or the people, all the people that we are trying to fit within it. And then a lot of these different definitions are, again, steeped in different notions of class, privilege, socioeconomic standards that are historically and systemically white. And so how do we unpack all of these things, understand that, and then start to define for ourselves and for the environment we want to work in, how do we want to show up? And so again, I don't want to criticize and say that people who are doing this work are doing it in a bad way or doing it wrong. I want to say that people who are doing these work consistently presenting these diagrams of professional attire in just this one way are not doing enough. They're not meeting or thinking about others that are not represented. And so as we think about this idea of professionalism, it's subjected and socially constructed as we look at a lot of different kind of identities that are somewhat nebulous, such as kind of race or even gender. The social construction and the power of that social construction takes over. And how do we begin to challenge that? And how do we know that it's okay to challenge that in certain spaces? And thinking about how it's also generational. So generationally, there were ways, or there were the opportunity, and there were only certain abilities to work in certain spaces. And so generationally, how have we evolved or changed how and where we work, and what needs to evolve and change in how we think about professionalism? I think about generationally, it was not considered professional to have your cell phone in a meeting environment. And now I think your cell phone and you getting an email or even taking notes on a cell phone or a laptop or a device is a regular pattern. And so thinking about how do we also recognize generationally where we at, or how our work has changed in the format of how we do work, and how do we need to change some of our expectations and rules behind that. And also, there's all of the wrong isms associated with these notions of professionalism. So again, if you Google professional workplace, professionalism, you're going to get a lot of images like that's shown here, people handshaking in black or gray or white suits in these like very like neutral glass office environments. I don't know what it is about glass and windows and professionals, but all professionals are around windows. So again, very interesting. But as we think about this, how do we start to understand? And I think particularly for folks in higher education, this isn't our work environment, and this is not who we are working with or for. And so the students that we serve, the individuals that we work with in a higher education or college environment are all dynamic and different. And so again, there are spaces and places where a suit might be something we choose to put on, but that's not necessarily required for us to be able to do our work or be able to engage in the training, the proficiency, and the learning that as a professional is defined to be able to do with our students or for our students. And so again, how do we start to unpack and redefine that? And so one thing that I'm proposing to unpack or redefine professionalism is to lean into this idea of aesthetic. So since professionalism is something that is socially prescribed or described or ascribed to people, I am proposing that we think about developing or cultivating your own aesthetic. And so I think aesthetic is defined or has been historically kind of associated with the art form or defining different types of art. But as we know, all words have developed or sometimes change in their meaning as we move along. And aesthetic has kind of evolved to not only define or name different forms of art, it also has been used as a way to define or name our personal style, and particularly personal style as it relates to dress, also personal style as it relates to personality. So when I talk about aesthetic in this TikTok generation, I think about the various types of aesthetics that in the TikTok world are presented. So there's cottagecore, there's emo girl, there's goth, there's Disney adult. There's all these different personalities or style types that are attributed to individuals. Those different personalities and style types are and were developed out of different people sharing hobbies or interests or likes, or people just kind of naming the different types of items that they like to wear and they like to see on them. And so again, as we think about redefining this notion of professionalism, aesthetic allows us, or defining this idea of our aesthetic, allows us to name or define for ourselves what that looks like. And I think, again, there's still the opportunity or some influence socially, because I think there's different aesthetic groups that are already being named. But even within that, you have a lot of autonomy to identify for yourself what that means for you. And then also when you name your aesthetic or you create your own aesthetic, I think a lot of folks really see that as an individual thing. I know one of the most interesting compliments that I've ever gotten from a student was a student. I was kind of working normally, engaging in a student program, and the student's like, I really love your aesthetic. Like, you're just bringing all this energy and how you put together that outfit. It was just so great. And I kind of looked and I was like, huh. Very interesting. And so again, the student recognized it was really a great compliment, right? So the student not only recognized who I was individually, but recognized that I really thought about how I wanted to show up. And so again, as we think about this idea of aesthetic, how do you embrace the things that you love about yourself, your personality, and show that to the world and show up in that and work? And show up in the way that you feel the most comfortable and are able to do. And so I also want to recognize and identify there are physical, financial, and emotional restraints in developing your aesthetic, right? So I like to say that I have like very bougie tastes on a very limited budget. So again, I may not wear lots of designers, or I think that I'm a Chanel girl and I'm in Target fashions, but I will make it look like Chanel. And so knowing that as you develop your aesthetic, it doesn't have to be, or as you're saying, I really want to be in these designer looks or things, not telling you that you have to only do those things. You're able to identify and do within your means and what's accessible. And so as you're developing this aesthetic and infusing it with how you show up. It's okay to do with what's in your means. And so I think that's really important as we think about getting ready for an interview like space, or getting ready to think about ourselves in an interview setting, because I think a lot of times people assume that I have to buy all these things to look a certain way for an interview setting. And then again, if you're thinking in an aesthetic view, you're buying what you love, what you're able to do, and what really defines you, or you're getting that, or you're looking for that in your own space. And so again, that feels a little bit better and you're not overextending. Also, when we think about aesthetic, colors matter. And I don't know, when I first just thought of thinking about colors mattering, I thought of colors in a way of expression. I thought of colors in a way of, in a lot of professional definitions or professional workplace kind of like articles or research, it all talked about neutral colors or black and gray, nothing too bright, nothing too patterned, as a way to kind of make sure you're understated and muted. For me, I like to live out loud, so you will never really see me in really muted, dark, neutral colors. A neutral color to me is glitter. And so again, that's how I show up. But when you think about colors, I really like to lean in this idea, or I was really intrigued as we think about colors and how they're defined, or how they kind of either express or help with this association with different emotions or feelings or thoughts. And so really leaning to how in the world of like branding and marketing, how colors are used to help emote or associate different either brands with different feelings and thoughts. But as you think about this in the aesthetic world, what are colors sharing or showing off about you? And so there's lots of different resources that look at this, but this was one that I thought was very simple. And so looking at these different colors, the colors you wear really emote this different feelings or emotions to those that are looking at you. And so again, as we think about this aesthetic, or thinking about how you show up in a workplace, colors do matter. So I'm someone who likes to wear a lot of bright, vivid colors. And so again, thinking about where you are in your own aesthetic development, thinking about things that you enjoy, think about what those colors say and what do those colors emote. So in a branding world, like red emotes this idea of excitement, strength, energy. There's other things that show or describe red in this terms of confidence and power, similar to orange as far as confidence, bravery, sociability. Also thinking about orange and both yellow showing this idea of creativity and strength. Looking at blue, also even deeper, like looking at navy blue, shows this idea of like competence and loyalty and trust. And so purple always is associated with royalty or luxury, ambition. Brown is trustworthy, simple. I think as you look at colors, there are some positive attributes to colors, and then there's some perceived negative attributes of colors. But I like to lean into the positives when you're thinking about how they play into your aesthetic or how you're showing up, and thinking about also what do you enjoy about them, right? And so I think I'm someone, again, who thinks glitter is a neutral color. And when people ask me my favorite color, I usually tell them it's like zebra print or polka dots. It's different patterns, right? And so when I think about colors, I like to bring or have colors that help me kind of express my moods or thoughts. And so again, leaning into those bright colors, but also leaning into colors that show and know that these colors emote different types of positive attributes, and it's okay to bring those in your style, especially in an interview space. And so I encourage you to kind of look more into that, look more into if you're thinking about your interview garb and you're like, yo, Caress, I have this really bomb black suit or gray suit. I'm just going to keep it simple. That's fine. Black is sophisticated, dramatic. Also, it does present a neutral palette, but you can also think about if there's colors that really show who you are, express who you are? How do you add those in little ways with either lapel pins? I know there are I have lots of colleagues who really like to have different lapel pins to show. And that's where they might bring in color or ties or different accessories. But colors really help, again, showing your identity, showing who you are, and helping you express that in your own style. Other ways to find your aesthetic. So what inspires you? Are there different characters, fictional, or actual characters or celebrities, fashion icons, quotes that you really connect to? I say a fashion icon that really inspires me is Miss Piggy. Like, she is someone who has lots of confidence and always dressed from head to toe. And again, a fictional character, but someone who is very fun. And so thinking about what inspires you, I think those that are visual learners, thinking about a mood board or Tumblr or Pinterest page of how can you bring together pictures or these quotes and really visually see maybe what your aesthetic is, or what is something, or what is your style. And then try it. So if there are things that you're like, I don't know if this is something that I would wear in an interview, or I don't know if this is something that really fits me, do it wearing like an everyday task. And so I think if there's something that you're hesitant that it might be not okay, or you don't know if you're okay with wearing it potentially in an interview space, wear it when you're running your errands at Target, wear it when you're going to an appointment. That will help you kind of gauge your confidence and wear it around kind of people you don't really know. And then that will, when you get to the interview space, you've already kind of tried it on, right? And so then you will be able to really kind of fully engage in what you're wearing and not feel and think about maybe how it might be looking. Thinking about the virtual interview. So as we think about translating this aesthetic to a virtual interview space, again, the virtual interview, I would say, is no different than an in-person. As you think about being prepared and how you want to show up, I think you want to give those same types of personality, engagement as you would in person. Again, dress in what makes you feel comfortable, both on and off camera. I think a lot of folks, and I think a lot of messages will say dress up or dress fully ready. Again, dress fully ready, but also feel comfortable. If you're at home and it's 95 degrees outside and you don't have air conditioning and you're interviewing, maybe you don't want to wear a fully wool suit the whole time because that'll make you feel hot. That's okay. And so thinking about not only how you're presenting yourself on the camera, but off the camera in your environment, how is what you're wearing going to impact how you're showing up in your body language? And in the words of one of my favorite villains, Ursula, don't underestimate the importance of body language. And so again, what you're wearing and how you show up all matters. And so if you feel uncomfortable, you're going to look uncomfortable in that interview space. Again, thinking about this idea of comfort and how you're showing up physically in an interview space, acknowledge your environment. So not everyone will be able to have an office that's completely quiet, away from people, or maybe you're not able to take space away from either friends or family that you have to take care of. And so it's okay in an interview environment, maybe with your host, or even as you start the interview, and acknowledge, hey, there's someone cutting the grass or construction work happening outside my apartment, or I'm taking care of a tiny human that needs me for their life. So I might have to tend to them during this interview. I hope I don't. But in the event that I do, know that they're there. And so acknowledging your environment that you're in, if there is a potential distraction, is always helpful just to set the tone. So then if those things happen, you're not kind of scrambling or feeling like you're thrown off in that setting. Also, as we think about body language, nonverbals are just as important. So when you are kind of sharing your answers, when you're talking in the kind of interview environment virtually, I think kind of nodding your head, I think when you kind of have someone asking you questions, nodding in response, Maintaining eye contact is really important. That really shows that you're listening. And so all the things that you would do in an in-person setting are just as important in a virtual setting because that shows your engagement. I think in a virtual setting, because of the muting and unmuting feature, I think it's going to be, there's that extra step of making sure or being mindful of, are you muted or are you not? Again, thinking about these virtual interview spaces, technology is a struggle for everyone. You would think in the year 2022 of Blue Ivy's internet, people would get it. We've been through this pandemic for almost 3 years now. Everyone should know how to use Zoom. Everyone should know when you click this button and you see that this is a line through your microphone, it is off. Hey, it is not, everyone is not there yet. And a lot of different employers are using potentially platforms that they've never used before. So it's okay that maybe technology isn't something that is your best, or maybe you might not be interviewing from a computer. You may have to use your phone. That's okay. It's important to maybe test your technology, thinking about ways that you can set it up to where you feel the most comfortable. I know if I am someone who I'm forced to use my phone for an interview, I like to kind of find a way to prop it up and maybe use my headphones as opposed to having to hold it, because then that helps me feel like I can really engage and speak in a space without worrying about my phone being moved in different ways as I move my hands when I talk. Again, knowing technology, not everyone has the ability to have headphones. And so thinking about your sound and testing your sound is always really important. Again, thinking about all those different things before your interview is really helpful. But again, we acknowledge the struggle and know that in a setting, if your internet is a little spotty, it's okay to kind of start your interview and say, hey, my Wi-Fi or my internet has been going in and out. Here's my cell phone number, or here's another way you can get in contact with me in the event that our interview is disrupted because of that. And so again, know that technology issues happen, and your employer or you trying to kind of get reconnected is the best thing you can do in those settings. And you'll kind of adjust as those things are needed. Another way to think about how do you show up and express yourself in those settings is thinking about your background as a way to show your aesthetic or your values, right? And so thinking about, are there particular photos or quotes you want to share? I know particularly in my background, I have you might be able to see some plants or flowers. I'm someone who loves plants and flowers when I can keep them alive. And so how do you have those maybe in your background showing? I know some people choose to have a blurred image in the background. That's okay too. Again, wherever you're interviewing, you're inviting folks into your personal space. And so you can choose to show and present whatever you want. I know some people like to use Zoom or virtual backgrounds. And so Google is a thing that you can Google. So funny story, I was Googling different professional interview backgrounds for this session. I was like, oh, it might be fun to change those up. And all they gave me were blurred bookcase, blurred office space, blurred coffee shop. And I was like, why are all these spaces blurred? So again, Google can give you different office backgrounds or blurred things. You can also think about making your own Zoom background in Canva. So I have colleagues who've made their own backgrounds where they have put their name and pronouns just as their background, as a way to have that be another visual way for employers to see that's from them. And so again, thinking about your Zoom background as a way to share who you are or what your values are to those that you are interviewing with. Another thing, thinking about your interview setting and how you're showing up is thinking about your notes. So the coolest thing about virtual interviews is that you have all of the visual kind of ability to have things around you where others can't see, right? So you can have the notes of the research that you've done on an institution, or kind of motivational notes on the side too. But think about how much you're referring to them. I think it's very telling if you're someone who have like a notebook or a lot of research and you're visibly reading that in an interview space. I think that's something that as an employer or as someone who's interviewed people before that has done that, it really kind of is a disconnect in an interview space, meaning that I think sometimes an interview is seen as a conversational kind of thing. And so if someone is reading a question or reading all of their answers, it doesn't seem like they're either genuine or that they're thoughtful of their response. And so have your notes, but know that you generally shouldn't refer to them or read them verbatim in an interview setting. And if you find that you are, how do you kind of take a moment and say, can I take a moment to kind of think about this? And then how do you review your notes and then go back to the question? And so another way that I have helped or thought about helping folks in a virtual interview setting is requesting the interview questions at the start of your interview via email or in the chat. So the cool thing, again, about these virtual interview settings that we can have a lot of access to different ways to process information. So if you're someone who processes things visually better, asking them to put the questions in the chat or saying, hey, it would be very helpful for me as I'm processing these questions to have a copy of them. And so having them send them to you is another way to really be able to process that information. Or if you're someone, I'm someone who likes to talk really fast. And so if I take time to read a question, that gives me ability to take a pause and reflect before answering. And so, yeah, it's thinking about also pauses are okay. But in a virtual setting, it's even more important to communicate that you're taking a pause so employers will know why you're silent. I will recall a few weeks ago, we were doing candidate interviews and an interviewer paused and we thought their like computer or tech froze. And so we were like, and trying to figure out, okay, like what's happening? Like, hey, did you freeze in the chat? And they weren't paying attention. So we had waited and they were like, oh, sorry, like I was taking some time. We were like, that's fine. But again, I think there's an assumption that when there's like a pause or there's no movement, that maybe something happened tech-wise. So you want to make sure you're communicating that to your interviewer so they're just aware of what's going on. So that's the end of my formal kind of overview of kind of professionalism, task, and thinking about your aesthetic. Want to open it up to questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and want to open it up to questions from you all about kind of the virtual interview space before I do some kind of closing announcements. So feel free to add them to the chat or say them out loud. As you're thinking of questions, I can share some announcements. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to join my session about kind of finding your aesthetic in virtual interview tips. So thinking about kind of upcoming opportunities and things that are available to candidates. So candidate connection office hours. So I'm hosting office hours until kind of right before the virtual event that's happening. And then I would say we have just a little over 2 weeks till the virtual event. So it's pretty exciting. So we are hosting, or I'm hosting candidate connection office hours. And so being able to help one-on-one to support you before the virtual event. Again, this is optional, so you can just sign up using this tiny URL /TPE22 Caress for a time that works for you. And that will be something that, again, we can connect one-on-one to answer any kind of questions you have about interviews, the process, things about the website, really available to do those things. And so I have a question. Mixed reviews about, there have been some mixed reviews about Zoom background. Some say it's fine, but others have said comments that it's distractions and that you're hiding something. What are your thoughts? That is a really good question. And so again, I think with Zoom backgrounds, it's kind of acknowledging or thinking about, is that something that, again, you want to do? I think it becomes distracting if your settings are not correct. So thinking about making sure your settings are accurate and it properly displays behind you is the best. I think it's only distracting if that the display of it is off. But I don't think it implies that you're hiding anything or that it's something that employers are questioning about. I think the only distraction is when it's not, the settings aren't proper and the, I guess, green screen becomes scattered. So I encourage you all to use any kind of Zoom background you want and use that. That's a great question. Other upcoming events. So you should have received one newsletter that was sent, I would say maybe 2 weeks ago. In another week, we're going to send another newsletter regarding kind of other sessions that are available to candidates, also employers, but particularly for candidates. On March 11th, we're doing, so this is the Friday before the virtual event, we'll have various workshop sessions available throughout the day, networking opportunities, and institutional spotlights, and virtual workroom and solution services. So these are kind of going to be available that whole Friday, just to kind of, again, a final day to kind of go through things, to give you information, to think about things. So some of the sessions will be kind of navigating no's. So navigating kind of getting a no from an employer, or even giving no's to employers as you're going through the interview process. Also a session around interview questions and what to ask in an interview. And so those are just a few examples of this workshop sessions that we will be hosting that day. But really the goal is to give you some content and information and do some last minute things to kind of help you, and then give you that weekend to really get prepared for the virtual event. And so know that there'll be a lot of different things happening on that Friday, the 11th, that you can engage in. And then during the virtual event, there'll still be opportunities for one-on-one coaching, workshops, sessions, institutional spotlights, and then again, that virtual workroom and solution station. And so lots of opportunities for help. And then again, if you are not following us on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook, you should. That's where we post a lot of our upcoming event information, but then we also share any of our past presentations or information that might be helpful for you. Also, you can reach out to us at candidates@theplacementexchange.org if you have any other nuanced questions. But I want to thank you all for attending this session and engaging with me today. You are all really, really great questions, and I hope you all have the best of luck as you are preparing for your search and developing your aesthetic. Again, thank you, and let me know if there's anything that I can do to help you prepare for your job search success.